We're going to do Perek Vav, and you will recall that the Pelishtim have captured the Aron HaKodesh, and they initially put it in 3 cities, first Ashdod, then Gas, and then they wanted to bring it to Ekron. Actually, Ekron didn't take it, because in every city it caused sickness, destruction, death, and as a result the Pelishtim resolved to return it to the Bnei Yisrael. But in the meantime, it was not in any city. They left it in an open field where there were no people around to be smitten. And the parak begins, Vayihi Aron Hashem b'stei Pelishtim Shiva Chadashim. After the cities refused to take in the Aron because it caused death and sickness, it remained in an open field for 7 months. Vayikru Pelishtim leKohanim u'leKosmim lemor, and the Philistines then called their priests, Kosmim, their sorcerers, Ma na'aseh li'Aron Hashem, how shall we treat the Aron? Meaning, how do we send it back? What ritual do we need to do? Hodiunu b'mana shalchenu limkoma, what gift shall we send with the Aron to propitiate, to kind of appease the God of Israel, who is angry at us? Vayomru, and the Philistine priest, the idolatrous priest, said, Im mishalchim es Aron Elokei Yisrael, if you are sending the Aron of God back to the Jewish people, al tishalchu oso rekam, do not send it back empty-handed. Ki hashev tashivu lo asham, you shall give something as an asham, as a guilt atonement. Az teirafu, and then you will be healed from the hemorrhoids and the sicknesses. V'naida lachem, and then you will know lama lo'isasar yadam mikem. In other words, by doing tshuva, you will know why God didn't take away His hand from you during this time, meaning God was punishing you. Vayomru, and they said to their kohanim, their idolatrous priests, Maha Hashem asher nashavla, what is the guilt offering we should bring? So again, this is a little peculiar, but this is what they said. Vayomru, mispar sarnei Pelishtim chamisha. There are 5 main noblemen of Pelishtim, because there are actually 5 cities on the Mediterranean under the control of the Philistines, and each of them had a prince or a duke. So there are 5 main Philistine officials. So take chamisha techorei zahav, fashion 5 golden hemorrhoids. It's a very peculiar kind of saying, asking for refuah from the hemorrhoids. V'chamisha achbarei zahav, and 5 gold models of mice or rats, because apparently the way it's described in Chazal, it's a little bit gruesome. As the hemorrhoids were swelling and even coming outside of the rectum, mice would come or rats would come and bite on it. So therefore, and that killed many people. Therefore, as a kapara, make 5 golden hemorrhoids and 5 golden rats. Ki magefa achas lekulam l'sarnechem, because this was one single magefa for you and your officers. V'yasisem Salmei tichorechem v'tzalmei achbarechem, you shall make images of the hemorrhoids and of the rats, hamashchisim es haaretz, that destroy the society, unesatem lelokei Yisrael kavod, and in that way you're acknowledging that this comes from Hashem, and you are giving Hashem honor. Ulai yakel es yado me'alechem, perhaps Hashem will lighten His hand against you, umiyal Elohechem, and from your gods, umiyal artzachem, and from your land. V'lama sechabdu es levavchem, why do you harden your heart? Kasher kivdu Mitzrayim uParo es libam, just as Paro hardened their hearts. Halo kasher yisalal bahem v'yishalchem v'yalechu, behold what God did when Paro hardened his heart. Again, initially Paro hardened his heart, eventually Hashem hardened Paro's heart. But Hashem mocked him, and eventually Hashem won, and Paro sent the Bnei Yisrael out of Mitzrayim v'Yelecha. And therefore, don't think you can escape your responsibility. You try to harden your heart, Hashem will break you. V'yata, and now, in addition to the golden hemorrhoids and the golden rats, Kechu v'yasu egla chadasha, make a new wagon, achas, ushtei parot, olot, asher lo ola aleim o, and the wagon should be drawn by 2 nursing cows. You'll see why this is important. And these are cows that never had a yoke on them. They've never done any other work. So the beginning of their work is this Avodas Hashem. V'yasartem es haparot bi'agala. You shall tie these nursing cows to the wagon. V'hashevosam beinayim mi'achareim habayisa. But the nursing voladot should be behind them in the direction of our houses. In other words, the cows are forced to walk in a direction the opposite of where their calves are. They normally wouldn't want to do this. So you'll see the purpose of this step. Ulakachtem es aron Hashem. You shall take the aron Hashem, unesatem oso el agala, put it in the wagon. V'yes klei hazahav asher hashivosem lo Hashem, and the golden utensils, the 10 golden hemorrhoids, and the 10 golden rats. Tasimu bi'argeis mitzido, put it in a box that is on the side of the aron. They're both on the agala. V'shilachtem oso, and send the wagon forward. V'halach. So now, here is the test. Uri isem. And then you will see. Im derech gevulo yale beit shemesh. If the cows continue to walk towards the Israelite boundary, which happens to be Beit Shemesh, then we know this is divine, because B'teva, the cows are going to go towards their children. They're not going to go in the opposite direction. If they go in the opposite direction, in the direction of Beit Shemesh, which is the Israelite border, even though their children are behind them, that shows that this is Hashem's ratzon, that it's God that punished us, and therefore we're doing tshuva. V'im lo, but if the cows don't move, and if they try to go in the other direction towards their children, then God is not concerned if we return the ark or not. And if God is not concerned, then He is not the one that punished us. Lo yado nagabanu. It is not God that afflicted us. Mikrahu. Fatal words that a Jew never says. Mikrahu. Coincidence. Hayalanu. Nothing to do with God. And the pasuk says, Vayasu hanoshim came, and they made the agala, and they put the aron on the agala, and they put the arges, the box, and they tied the cows, and the cows' children were in back of them. Vayasrum bi'agala v'espeneim kalu babayit. They kept the volados in the house. V'yasimu es aron Hashem al agala. They put the aron of Hashem on the wagon. V'es arges v'es achbrei azov v'es salmei techorim, and the box that contained the golden rats and the golden hemorrhoids. And what happened was, Vayisharna haparot baderech al derech Beit Shemesh b'mesila. The parot went straight on the road towards Beit Shemesh, which was the Israelite border. Achas, one road. Holchu haloch v'ga'o. They were bellowing. In other words, they had tsar that they could not nurse their children. But they continued to go on that derech. V'lo soru yaminu smol. They did not go to the right. They did not go to the left. They went straight to Beit Shemesh. V'sarnei plishtim holchem achareim ad gavul Beit Shemesh, and the Philistines were accompanying this wagon until Beit Shemesh, which is the border between the Israelite territory and the Philistine territory. Beit Shemesh kotzrim k'tzir chitim ba'emek, and this was the time that the people of Beit Shemesh were harvesting the wheat harvest in the valley outside of the city. This is around Shavuos time. Vayisu eseineim, and they lift up their eyes, and all of a sudden they see in the distance the Aron HaKodesh is coming back to Am Yisrael. Vayismechu lirot, and they were so happy to see the Aron HaKodesh. V'yagala ba'a el Sidei Yahushua Beit HaShimshi. And initially, it entered the field of Yahushua, who was a resident of Beit Shemesh. This is not Yoshua ben Nun. This is, of course, a later Yoshua. V'tamot sham. And at that point, the wagon stopped. The cows stopped. And the wagon remained in that field. V'tamot sham. It stood still. V'sham Evan Gedola. There was a great, great stone. And the Jewish people saw that as a sign that we bring a korban to Hashem. Again, halachically, it's a little bit of a problem. We have, I stand corrected. Remember that the Mishkan, I should have said this before, that when the Aron was taken out of the Mishkan of Shiloh, and the Plishtim captured the Aron, they also destroyed the Mishkan in Shiloh. And at that point, there were korbanos brought in Nov and Givon later, but bamais are permitted. In other words, from the time that Shiloh was destroyed until the time of the Beis HaMikdash B'mei Shlomo, korbanos on private altars are permitted, and therefore they are permitted to bring a korban in Beit Shemesh. And the fact that the wagon stopped was a siman that it's proper to bring a korban here. Vayivako Zatzei Agala. They cut the wood of the agala to use as fuel. V'yes haparot helu ola l'Hashem, and the two parot were brought as a korban, ola, a burnt offering to Hashem. And then haLeviim, because carrying the Aron is normally an avodah of the Leviim, hayridu es Aron Hashem v'esargez esheritoi. They took down the Aron from the wagon. This is before the wagon was cut up. And the arges, the box or the chest that had the golden statuettes. The Yasimu el Evan Agdola, and they put the Aron on top of this big stone. So the stone was not the altar. The stone was the makom of the Aron. The Anshe Beit Shemesh helu olot. The inhabitants of Beit Shemesh, they brought burnt offerings in honor of Hashem. Vayizbechu zevachim, and they brought peace offerings, shlamim, b'yomahu Hashem. Now the 5 Philistine officials, they walked up until the border, but they didn't cross the border. They're seeing this from Philistine country at a distance. V'chamisha sarnei plishtim ra'u. V'yashuvu Ekron b'yomahu, and they returned to Ekron, confident that Hashem would remove the curse from their people. And the pasuk explains, "Ve'ela techarei azav asher hishivu plishtim Hashem l'Hashem." The hemorrhoids, the golden hemorrhoids. Again, it's an odd thing to say that the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to Hashem. The reason there were 5 is because there were 5 Philistine cities: Ashdod echad, Azza echad, Ashkelon echad, Lagas echad, Liekron echad. Right, the 5 cities: Ashdod, Azza, Ashkelon, Gas, Ekron. And similarly, the Achberezov, the golden rats, were the same thing. Misper kolare plishtim chamishas ranim meir mivsor ad kofer aprazi. That although there were 5 main cities, but there were many other cities, some of which were fortified and some of which were open villages, and this was meant to be a kapara for all of them. Ad avel gedola sheranichu aleha es aron Hashem ad hayom hazeh b'shtei Yoshua beis Shimshi. And the place where the Aron rested in the field of Yoshua of Beit Shemesh became known as the city of Avel Gedolah, great mourning. Now this is a little difficult because you don't know why yet, but the next pasuk tells me why. A great tragedy happened that day. Vayach bi'anshe Beit Shemesh ki ra'u bi'arayin Hashem vayach ba'am shivim ish chamishim elef ish. That the people of Beit Shemesh were smitten by a divine plague. They died because they gazed at the Aron Hashem, and you're not supposed to look, even in the midbar. You cover up the Aron so people shouldn't stare at it. And as a result, 70 people and 50,000 people died. Now this is a little peculiar. Why does it split it? If it was 57,000 people dying, it should have just said Vayach Chamishim. I'm sorry, it's not 57,000. It's 50,070. So some Mefarshim learn, based on Chazal, that only 70 people died, but their spiritual merit was so great that they were equal to 50,000 people. Others actually say 50,070 died. And because of this day of great simcha also became a day of great tragedy. And the field of Yahushua of Beit Shemesh became known as Ovel Gedolah, great mourning. Vayisablu ha'am ki hika Hashem bi'am maka gedolah. Vayomru anshe Beit Shemesh, similar to the Pelishtim. We can't have the Aron here. The Aron brings death and destruction because of its kedusha. Mi yuchal lamod lifnei Hashem Elokim HaKadosh Hazeh. Who could live with the standards? You look at the Aron too long, and all of these things happen. El mi yala me'aleinu. Who will survive this? And therefore, they looked for another place to take the Aron. Vayishlechu malachim el yoshvei Kiryat Ye'arim leimor. The shluchim finally found in Kiryat Ye'arim, right, Telstone, Kiryat Ye'arim, near Yerushalayim, Heishivu Pelishtim es Aron Hashem, behold, the Philistines returned the Aron HaKodesh. Ridu, come down to us, He'alu oso aleichem, bring it up to you. And again, I'll just read one pasuk from the next parak. V'yavo anshe Kiryat Ye'arim, v'yalu es Aron Hashem. The people of Kiryat Ye'arim brought the Aron up from Beit Shemesh. V'yaviu oso el beis Avinadav b'Givah. It was kept in the house of a man called Avinadav. That's a great honor, in Givah, who lived on top of a hill. V'yes Elazar beno kitshu lishmor es Aron Hashem. And Elazar, the son of Avinadav, was designated to be the honor guard of the Aron. There was nothing to do with the Aron. Remember, this is not where Karbanos were brought. Karbanos are brought in Nov and Givain. But the Aron is in the house of Avinadav in Kiryat Ye'arim, and the pasuk then goes on and tells us that it remained there for 20 years. One of the very, very difficult questions is that the Aron HaKodesh is always supposed to be where the Mizbeach is. In the Mishkan, you have the Mizbeach and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. In the Beis HaMikdash, you have it that way. In Shiloh, it was that way. But for these years, it's around 50 years, you have the Aron HaKodesh in one place. First, it's in Beit Shemesh for a while, for a day. Then it's for 20 years in Kiryat Ye'arim. But the Mizbeach for the Korban Tamid and the Korban Musaf is in Nov, the city of Kohanim, until Shaul wipes it out. And then in Givon, until Shlomo HaMelech builds the Beis HaMikdash. So one question is, why for those 50 years is the Aron HaKodesh not together with the Mizbeach? Why are we keeping it in a different place? So we'll leave that as a question to think about. Kol Tov.